Welcome to Sounding Board, a program brought to you by Seroptimus International of Novato. This is an organization whose mission is to improve the lives of girls and women locally and globally. Today's program is an update and a review of Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit, or better known by its acronym SMART. And today's guest is Matt Stevens, who is with their Department of Community Outreach and Education. Hi, Matt.
Hi.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great, thanks. It's
Good.
a pleasure to be here today.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to have you. Would you give us a little bit of history about SMART, and then we can move on to what's happening currently?
Yes. SMART has a long history, and in fact, the North Bay has a rich railroading history that goes back to the late 1800s, when many different railroads were building railroads, as it was the only way to get around in those days. We're using a historic rail corridor called the Northwestern Pacific Rail Corridor, and that was operated by Southern Pacific up until the 1970s. And when they were getting out of the freight business in Northern California, they put the rail corridor up for sale. And there were some people in the North Bay who were genuine visionaries who had a vision that we may want to run trains again someday. And Bob Bromiere from the Marin Board of Supervisors, Carney Campion from the Golden Gate Bridge District, and Jim Harbinson from the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors were kind of the ringleaders. And they worked together to purchase the rail corridor from Southern Pacific. It took a number of years to do that, but by the mid-1980s, they had brought that rail corridor into public ownership. So SMART is using a public corridor, and the tracks that SMART owns goes from about Healdsburg in Sonoma County down to Larkspur Landing, and then out to a point on a map in Napa called Lombard. In the 1990s, when congestion was getting worse and business and housing was growing, particularly in Sonoma County, there was a key study done by Peter Calthorpe, a land use planner from UC Davis. And then they looked at the future of growth and congestion in the North Bay and determined that passenger rail service would be a good idea to re-implement. In 2000, the SMART Commission was formed, and that was a joint powers commission made up of Sonoma and Marin elected officials and some membership from Golden Gate Bridge District. And their mission was to actually reestablish passenger rail service. The SMART District was created in 2002 by then Assemblyman Joe Nation, and that transportation district had the authority to put a sales tax measure on the ballot, and we put the measure. We actually had two measures that were on the ballot. Right. In 2006, we had Measure M, and that narrowly missed passage by a few thousand votes. As we all know, Prop 13 requires that all sales tax measures in California be passed by a 2/3 majority. Something that nobody thought SMART could do, frankly. And but it was such a close vote in 2006 that the SMART Board of Directors felt it was a mandate from the voters to bring it back. And so we did some tweaks to the proposal. We added weekend service, for example, and put Measure Q on the ballot in 2008. And of course, that was also the presidential election year, which helped tremendously.
More voter turnout.
Exactly. And so we were able to pass that sales tax measure by a 69% yes vote. Marin County actually contributed about 65.5% yes vote, and Sonoma County contributed about 71% yes vote. And so together we crossed that magic threshold.
That's great. And then you started to get your funding, federal funding, or? Well,
not exactly. We do have federal funds in the project now, but and I'll explain what that is. But the way you build a project like this using local sales tax dollars is you pass a local sales tax, and then you sell bonds backed by that sales tax, and so we were able to do that. So you get your capital up front to build the project. Now, of course, we knew what happened in 2008 after President Obama was elected, was that the economy suffered a pretty significant recession. And like most people and entities, SMART suffered from that, and we weren't. Our sales tax revenues were lower than expected, and so the SMART Board of Directors had to rethink how to deliver the project that the voters voted for. So they phased the project, which is actually not uncommon for large infrastructure projects.
Right.
And we picked a first phase that goes from essentially North Santa Rosa to downtown San Rafael. And that captures about 80% of the total ridership we would have expected from the project. So it's a good first phase.
So when they actually voted for the measure they were voting for, was it Larkspur all the way to Cloverdale at the time?
Yes, the original project was Cloverdale to Larkspur, and so we had to rethink that. Especially because north of Santa Rosa, there are some very expensive pieces of infrastructure that have to be probably replaced. For example, there's a bridge across the Russian River, and then just the length of trackway from Santa Rosa to Cloverdale is a lot of track to build. And so we're working on we call them extensions now. So that where I mentioned that we do have federal dollars in the project, and that is for the Larkspur extension. End of last year, President Obama put his omnibus budget together, and in that budget there was $20 million in the Federal Transit Administration's Small Starts program for SMART. And those dollars survived the congressional budget process, and when Obama signed the budget, it included dollars for SMART. And so the Larkspur extension is now fully funded, and we expect to start construction on that extension in the summer of 2017.
And it goes from
downtown San Rafael to Larkspur Landing.
Right, so that allows more commuters who are interested in taking the ferry to downtown San Francisco.
But people don't really fully understand today, most commuters don't go further south than San Rafael. Historically, San Francisco was the destination for most commuters on 101. But over the last 20 years, the employment market in the North Bay has grown. Good jobs have come to the North Bay. And so most people who drive in 101 today from Sonoma County don't go further south than San Rafael.
Right. But from Marin, from Novato, heading south?
Yes. The further south you go in Marin County, the more people go to San Francisco,
right.
Particularly southern Marin.
Right. So, okay. When is this all going to be running? When are we going to be able to ride on a train?
Well, I got to tell you, I'm personally very excited about this. I've been working on this project for a long time, and to see it move from just a conceptual idea to something concrete as a train on the tracks, it's very exciting. And so we intend to start operations later this year, for sure by the end of the year. Right now, we're in what's called systems integration testing, where all the various separate systems that need to work well together, we're bringing them together now and testing those systems. And then once that process is complete, we will begin what's called simulated revenue service. And what that will look like is all of our trains running at our proposed schedule, at our proposed speeds, as if we were carrying passengers, but without carrying passengers. And we'll be doing that probably in June.
Oh, great. And how long does that testing take?
Well, it depends on what the results are. All this testing is designed to basically expose any problems we have. We want to make sure that by the time we carry passengers, everything's been sorted out and all problems have been solved. And so it could be anywhere from 1 month to 2 or 3 months.
And so the first day of operation, will it be a train system that runs from Santa Rosa all the way to Larkspur, or will you be implementing in phases?
Yes. No, we will start up service. The service will start from Airport Boulevard, north of Santa Rosa, to downtown San Rafael. We have 10 stations we'll be serving. There's 3 stations in Santa Rosa, Airport Boulevard, at Guerneville Road near Coddingtown, and then downtown Santa Rosa at the Old Railroad Square. And then in Rohnert Park, at Rohnert Park Expressway, where the tracks cross. It's near the old State Farm campus. And in Cotati, at East Cotati Avenue, near Sonoma State University. And then downtown Petaluma. And then there's 2 stations, although we'll talk about this in a minute, I think, but there's 2 stations in Novato, at San Marin and at Hamilton, and the City Council of Novato just recently passed a resolution to pay for the building of the tracks and the gauntlet tracks and the station platform, foundation walls and ramp before we start operations, because it would be difficult to get that installed after we start operations.
Right.
And so they just voted to do that. And then there's 2 stations in San Rafael at the Civic Center, and then downtown San Rafael at Heatherton and 4th Street.
The hub.
Yeah,
Where?
right across the street from the Bettini Transit Center. So
Right.
it's an easy walk from the train to the bus.
Right, and then the last stop would then be Larkspur,
Yes.
which is where the Marin Airporter,
Yes.
or by the Marin Airporter
It's kind
had
of where,
been?
yes, it's near where the Marin Airporter used to be. I think it's Century Theater. And so the Cal Park Tunnel is actually, I think, a wonderful piece of infrastructure because we have a bike path that goes through the tunnel as well as the train
Right.
tunnel. And so just south of the train tunnel will be the platform.
it's pretty exciting. So by the end of 2016, we believe.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
I'll take that to the bank.
Okay, good. Tell us a little bit about the train itself, like the rail cars, where they're coming from.
Okay. The vehicles are manufactured by an American subsidiary of Nippon Sharyo named Sumitomo Corporation of America. We had a competitive bidding process for the train vehicles, and Sumitomo actually, when you do a bidding process like this, there's 2 pieces to the competition. There's a technical specifications piece, and then there's a pricing piece. And Sumitomo won both competitions.
Oh.
They had the best proposal that came closest to meeting our specifications, and they also won the pricing competition by $20 million. And so it was
Well, that's quite a savings.
easy choice to make. And they're good cars. The Sumitomo, or actually Nippon Sharyo, they're the company that makes the bullet trains in Japan, and they're the oldest continually running train manufacturer in the world. So they've been in this business for a long time. We'll be operating 2-car train sets. They're mirror images of each other. And so when the train cars come to, say, downtown San Rafael, we don't have to turn them around.
Right.
The train operators walk to the other end and head north. The capacity, seated capacity is about 158 people seated, and we have standing room for about 160 more people. And we have capacity for 24 bicycles, depending on how many wheelchair users or stroller users there are. The train cars will have an onboard bathroom on one of the cars, and then where the onboard bathroom would be on the other car, we're going to have a service bar. And the board hasn't taken up the policy decision yet on what will be served, but the board has made many public comments in the past that they would like to serve beer and wine, much like the ferry does.
Right.
But we'll see. I'm not promising that yet.
Right. It's the bar car on the ferry is very popular.
It is. Yep.
You're saying that there's 150 or
158 people seated.
seated, and yet how many more for standing room?
160.
So that's
There's a lot of
large
capacity. Right. And obviously, you know, if we had 158 seated and 160 standing, that would be a very packed train. But it makes sense for a standing ride because the average trip is between 2 and 3 stations in length, like you know, Petaluma to Novato, Petaluma to Santa Rosa, Novato to Petaluma, that kind of thing, you know. And what else about the train, I think?
Well, it's 2 cars now, and suppose you
Well, thank
did
you.
reach capacity. Would you be able to expand to 3 cars?
Yes, yes.
Or a more frequent schedule?
We would go to adding a 3rd car first. In fact, we received last year a cap and trade grant from the state of California to purchase 3 what we call C cars. And those are the middle cars that you would put in between the 2 A and B cars.
Oh, okay. A, B, C. All right.
Yep.
Okay. And fare pricing, have you?
You know, we haven't established an actual fare yet. We're working on a fare policy. What we have established is that we'll be utilizing a distance-based or a zone-based fare structure. So, for example, Zone A will be Santa Rosa. And so if you take the train within Santa Rosa, you'll pay a fare that's less than, say, if you're taking the train from Santa Rosa to Petaluma. And so it will be a zone-based system, but we're still working on the fare calculation, and we'll be bringing that to the board of directors probably this summer before we start operations.
Okay. And there will be discounts for seniors and children?
Yes. We've adopted the Sonoma County Transit discount policy. So for seniors and youth, it's a 50% discount.
That's quite a savings.
It is, yeah.
What about pricing of usage, like prime time commute times? Would that be a higher fare possibly?
You know, I don't think we're going to do dynamic pricing. I think it'll be the same price whether it's 7 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock in the morning.
Great, good.
Yeah.
And what about the, I remember when I voted for the passing of the train, it included a pathway,
Yes.
which was very, very, very exciting to me.
Yes. That's a critical part of the project as well. In fact, you know, we think of it as the Train and Pathway Project. So the pathway, the idea behind the pathway is that where we have room within the corridor, we will build a Class 1 bicycle path. Now, how do you define where there's room? There's two ways I define it. One is there physical space? And the second way I define it is there a wetlands or not? And one of the challenges that we've faced in terms of building this project is that when the rail corridor was built in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was no such thing as a wetland. It was a swamp. And what did we do with the swamp back in the day? We filled it in.
Right.
And so as a result, the SMART corridor goes through a lot of wetland. And so building a Class 1 bicycle path, and Class 1 is like a paved bicycle path. It's like building a road. And we're not allowed to build roads in wetlands anymore. And so where we're not able to build a pathway within the SMART corridor, we will be working with local jurisdictions, local municipalities to either improve or build pathways, Class 2 pathways adjacent or parallel to the SMART corridor.
And what is a Class 2?
Class 2 is a 3-foot paved shoulder with a stripe, and then there's signage that basically says this is a bike path on a post as well as on the pavement.
Oh, okay. The difference then
Yeah.
between 1 and 2 is width, possibly? Or?
Actually, the difference between 1 and 2 is grade separation.
Oh, okay.
So what that means is that a Class 1 bike path is separated from a roadway. So there's no way that a car can travel on a bike path and potentially hit and injure a bicyclist. A Class 2 bike path is on a roadway. And so they utilize a wide white stripe and signage to indicate that this is a bike path.
And what percentage was Class 1 versus Class 2?
Boy, I'm not sure if I can pull this out of long-term memory, but it's about between around 60% we have room in the corridor for a bike path, and then about 40% we don't. A good example of this is between Petaluma and Novato, the train tracks actually veer into real wetlands, and so we can't build a bike path there. Caltrans, however, they've just recently completed a frontage road between Novato and Petaluma, and that's a part of the highway widening project that will occur someday.
Yes.
And on that project, they actually built, part of the way they built a Class 1 bike path that's grade separated, and the other part of the way it's Class 2 on a frontage road.
So then people using the pathway with the rail might switch over to the Caltrans path and then go back?
Well,
Okay.
you know, I think there's two purposes or ways the pathway will be utilized. Obviously, one is for recreation purposes, but the other way is to get people to the train. We all fixed. Trains are what's called a fixed guideway system. That means that you can't change the route. This is true for all fixed guideway systems. You have something called the last mile problem. And the last mile problem is when you get to your destination station, how do you actually get to where you're going? And because we're a commuter rail project, the last mile problem is how do you get to work? And so there's no one-size-fits-all solution. It depends on where the employment place is. It depends on a person's orientation towards cycling or walking or, you know, however they get around. My favorite solution is the bicycle, by the way. And I think that, and so the Pathway project, we've got 7 pathway segments under construction now. And the focus of these projects are to link existing pathway segments together and then link those pathway segments to train stations. So people can ride their bike to a train station.
To encourage bikers.
Right, and then they can either do one of 2 things. They can either put their bike on the train, or they can do what a lot of commuters do, is you have 2 junker bikes, and you park one junker bike at your origination station, and then when you get to your destination station, you'll have a second junker bike that you can ride to work. And so we will also have bike parking facilities at all of our stations.
Good, good.
Oh, actually, I'd like to just sort of close the loop on
Sure.
the last mile problem.
Sure.
For those people who don't want to cycle, we're also working with all the large employers in kind of in a public-private partnership where we're getting some, working with a private vendor to get some cost estimates and what it would cost to provide shuttle service from train stations to employment centers. And the large employers would pay for those because we don't have that in our budget for that. But we're working with them to help facilitate that. Some large employers are actually doing their own shuttle service. For example, I got an email recently from Marine General asking about would we require any permits
To come and
to pick up people, right?
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
That's good. I'm sure a lot of people are jumping on board.
Right.
What about safety? We have a few more minutes left, and I
Yeah.
think we should touch
Yeah.
base about the safety.
Safety is it's important to SMART and important to me. We haven't had any significant and frequent train service in the North Bay since 1958. The last regular passenger train ran in November '58. And so we have approximately 2 generations of people who haven't grown up with trains in their lives. And trains are large. They're a train can't stop on a dime. So if somebody's on the tracks, a car or a pedestrian, and a train operator sees that person or car, they'll blow the horn, but they won't be able to stop. And so we have to educate people how to be safe around trains and tracks. And so we started a significant education program in 2012, starting with schools, elementary schools in particular.
Right.
And so since then, we've been going into schools on a regular basis and deliver safety messaging. We work with a theater troupe in Sonoma County called Safety Pals that's run and acted by public safety organizations like Highway Patrol, Sonoma County Sheriff, Sonoma County Fire, SMART. We have a character in that play called Chrissy Crossbuck, and they talk about rail safety.
That's kind of cute. They bring it
Yeah.
into the school, and that's
Right. And now we're working to take our education effort to train adults. So there's really 3. I'd like to sort of mention 3 safety recommendations or safety tips.
Please.
If you're a pedestrian, the only safe and legal place to cross the tracks is at a railroad crossing. There's a sign called a crossbuck that's like this, and it says railroad crossing, and there's pedestrian crossing infrastructure at those crossings. People should not use the rail corridor to walk as a path of travel. We're fencing a lot of it off right now to keep people off the tracks. If you're a car driver, it's very important to obey all safety signals systems. When you see the lights flash and the gates come down, don't race a train through the crossing. Be sure that you don't stop on the tracks or stop on the tracks themselves. There's a white line called a stop bar. So if you remember, if you take your driver's ed test or your driver's test, there's questions about that. So you want to stop behind the stop bar. And then bicyclists too. It's important for bicyclists when you're crossing the tracks to pay attention, slow down, or walk your bike across the tracks. It's always important to cross the tracks at a perpendicular angle, because if you cross at any other angle, your tires might slip in the tracks and you will fall. So I think the bottom line for all kinds of people is to be sure to look and listen. Trains are loud. Actually our trains are quiet, but we have a horn, so we'll be blowing the horn. And then the railroad crossings have bells attached to them. And so if you pay attention and follow the rules, you'll be safe.
That's great. I did hear you're talking about your trains being quiet. I did see something about they're extremely quiet.
Yes.
that a car going at 50 miles per hour makes as much noise or something to that effect?
Our trains will produce about 80 decibels of sound, just the train itself, and that's about the same as a city bus, like a Marin County bus.
Right.
And so I've done a lot of work with the media in the train, and I've stood in the tracks and had the train go by, and you don't hear it very well when it approaches you. Once it goes by you, you hear it.
Right.
So that's why they have horns.
Right. And the cross gates that go down.
Yes, yes.
And one quick question, the rails are shared with freight lines.
Yes, the north of Healdsburg, the tracks are owned by the North Coast Rail Authority. That's another agency established by the state to own and manage the tracks all the way up to Eureka, California. And their mission is to offer and support freight service. We have an operating agreement with them, and they have a freight operator that does utilize our tracks. However, unlike Amtrak, we control the dispatch, and passenger service has priority over freight, and so freight will be operating around passenger service.
Yeah, that's great. Very good. Well, we're about ready to wrap up here, so is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, thank you. I just want to encourage everybody to consider using the train as an alternative to driving on 101. Over 65% of our greenhouse gas emissions come out of our tailpipes, and I think it's an imperative that we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and the SMART train is a really good way to do that.
Smart way to go to wherever you're going.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Again, I'm Nancy Weber, and I thank you for your being with us today, and I'd like to thank Matt Stevens with SMART. Also, a shout out to the crew of Soroptimist International and to the Buck Institute for the use of the studio. Thank you.